All right, we're about to embark on our last event of the evening. We have a fireside chat with one of the most progressive leaders in technology at the world's most renowned financial institution, Goldman Sachs. I'm excited to welcome Goldman's Chief Information Officer, Marco Argenti.
Marco, thanks so much for being with us today. This is a real treat.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be awesome.
I understand I'm between these people and drinks.
And drinks and
entertainment.
And entertainment and stuff.
Okay,
so
good.
We're going to do some entertaining, and then they'll have some more entertaining.
That's great.
So let's start here. Let's just jump right in. Goldman is over 150 years old. You lead technology there. Why is technology, or how is technology so important at such an old institution? Like, how do you think about it strategically?
Well, so out of about 45,000 people, about 12,000 people are technologists and developers, so it's almost like a third of the company. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because we are a fully digital business. We do not, have physics or high temperatures or transportation of stuff. We're fully an information, in a way, company. And obviously, the ability to reason on data, to process data, the ability to make decisions based on data, the ability to transact, and basically moving digital representation of money across the world's financial system is really what we do. And today, obviously, a lot of what we do is really determined by our ability to lead in technology. So for us, technology is really the lifeblood of our organization, and also is becoming more and more a factor for differentiation.
And has technology always had that role in the firm? I mean, has it always been a critical thing to being successful, or is this something more recent?
I think what brought me to Goldman from my previous experience at Amazon is that I started to see that for many companies, especially in fields like financial services, technology was starting to become a key item in the strategic agenda of the CEO. So there's been always technology, obviously, I mean, for the last, 40 years in financial institutions, but it started from the back. It started from the back office. It started from, okay, we need to make sure that we have computers, printers, and then servers, et cetera, like IT, right? And then it kind of started to walk its way up to a point in which you notice it, and you actually want to kind of leverage it for your own, for really advancing your business, rather than something that nobody notices until it doesn't work, you know what I mean? Which was kind of the traditional IT. And so I think there's been a disruption pretty much in every sector to really put software at the center of what you do. Obviously, there are clear examples that I've seen when I was at AWS, for example, in automotive, where I was working with a lot of automotive companies, and really the two things that are disrupting the market there are electrification and autonomous in its various forms, and both are software. One is about battery management and algorithm for recharging and so forth, and the other is obviously about various forms of AI. And so the industry has been completely disruptive, and those who didn't have technology capabilities, they started to have to catch up, regardless of their market share. And I saw the same thing happening in other businesses, and so I was really tempted by kind of being part of this disruption and this revolution, not too much as a vendor of software, but as someone that from within the organization could actually disrupt it. And I think, when I met with David Solomon and we started to talk about me and others coming into Goldman Sachs from a non-financial background, which was a little bit of a stretch, I think I was really impressed by the fact that, from the very top, there was a realization that, you cannot be a leader in your industry without being a leader in technology. And today, at that point, it was kind of an intuition. Today, with AI, it's almost a certainty. You can't have a discount just because you're not in technology. You might accept a lower kind of proficiency or even action on AI because we see how disruptive that can be. And so I think the leaders will be the leaders. The leaders in any industry, including financial services, will be the leaders in AI.
Do you think it helps you having not grown up in finance?
I think, obviously there's been a lot of learning. You really need to understand the business, and that's also something that we're telling all our engineers with what we call the working backwards, meaning understanding who's the customer first, and then what is really the problem you're trying to solve, and really creating these narratives before you start writing software. And more on that later, because I think that's particularly important in the age of AI, where everything is a prompt, right? So, but at the same time, I think if you want to disrupt, you need to bring an external perspective of some kind. And so being able to see with kind of fresh eyes, I think it was important. And now, I mean, we are at a point in which, with the level of disruption that AI is bringing in every field, it's very hard to say I'm an expert on anything. So at that point, it's kind of saying, okay, it's not too much about what I learned in the last X amount of years. It's about how I think about the future. And that's true for everybody. I think right now we need to start opening, really, like, one of the imperatives, I think, with this disruption, whatever this is going to be, is that it really forces us to rethink any of the deep convictions that we have.
So one of the challenges right now, just given how much change is taking place and how quickly things are advancing, is people setting their priorities. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you. What are your priorities right now, and how do you think about setting those priorities?
So interestingly, before I tell you what are the priorities, I want to tell you what is our mental model around how to prioritize, okay? Because at the end of the day, it's almost more important to know how to prioritize than today's priority, because the market and the technology is moving so fast that what seems to be a priority today might not be a priority the next day. And so in terms of kind of prioritization algorithm, so I tend to think about the following. Like, you have, first of all, a bifurcation between sustaining technology and disruptive technology, meaning, in other words, in simple terms, what's going to save you money and what's going to allow you to make more money, okay? And I think one of the things one of the biases that we need to fight is the temptation to over-index on things that are going to make you more productive, okay? And there are many of them. Because, as I like to say, being fit doesn't make you a champion, right?
Right.
Although, in order to be a champion, you need to be fit. And so we need to also think about what are the disruption and the use cases that are actually making you more productive. And then there is also this other element, which is, let's assume that the future is not going to be substitution of humans by machine, but it will be actually a synergy between the best quality of a human and the best quality of a machine, working together to create something that is transcendent and is actually like superhuman in a way. And so the first question to ask is, within your organization, which are the personas that you want to superhumanize first? And I think it's like almost like this quadrant of impact and quantity. So you have large groups of people that make large impact. That should be probably your first priority. So in our case, one of the first things that we looked at is how to increase our developer productivity, because obviously we have 12,000 of them, and they generally tend to have a high impact, but also a significant cost for the company. What if we can make them 10, 20% more productive, which means we can release products maybe 20, 30% faster? And then you start to think about our high impact, bankers, for example, where what I like to call the return of attention is so important. If they have, time to have, let's say, 100 client meetings in a month, and those are like really high relationship type of bankers, how can we actually make those meetings a large percentage of them great meetings that are value adding for the client, and so equip them with insights, equip them with the right topic to talk about, when to call someone, because an AI maybe has figured out what is the right moment to call you, because an event might be relevant for you. So there is a little bit of this concept of targeting that also now applies to human, where I'm actually helping you as an AI to target your attention on the highest return activities. So currently, back to your original question, we're definitely looking at the developer productivity use case. We're also looking at all the use cases that can make our top producers even more productive or even more effective, I should say. We're looking at, obviously, massively at the education part of our job. How you take someone that just joined the firm and make them, learn, shorten the apprenticeship period so they can seniorize themselves faster. Because, one of the things that I really believe on is that AIs are really good at codifying unstructured knowledge into something that you can ask questions to. And that is typical of every company. If you enter any company today, including Goldman Sachs, you will find out that a lot of the knowledge is in people's heads. And so you have to know who to talk to and about what, and developing this sort of a knowledge network can take years sometimes. So what if we could shorten that? What if we could capture, the way certain people talk and think, and then being able to query that and create a sort of a common knowledge base on specific topics. So I think, knowledge extraction and summarization, knowledge augmentation, interactivity of learning, and of course all the activities that are related to some of the choices that we make in investing or in research, etc., are all areas that we're really looking at with extreme interest.
And is the vision, if we go 5 or 10 years out, that each of the major personas has almost like a co-pilot that's working along with it, or? I
think so. I think there will be some parts of the job that are going to be redirected. So, for example, if you look at some of the complexity of our, and every bank's sort of a back office, like document classification, production of reports, etc., anything that, or production of pitch books, everything that has a large manual component, you could redirect those resources to do something that is a little bit more, more on the knowledge and on the thinking side rather than on the production side. So that's a shift that is happening. But then other than that, potential substitution, I think, is more like you said, like the co-pilot model, where you have something that is extremely effective at, allowing you to have new tools that you never had before in order to do what you do potentially in order of magnitude better.
Mm-hmm. So the hot words of the moment are generative AI.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about that, the opportunities there, and where that fits into your overall agenda?
I think when we talk about generative AI, there are the first question is what are they really good at? Because it's very easy to kind of confuse generative AI with AI in general, and there are actually certain things where other types of AIs are actually better than generative for certain tasks. More like the traditional machine learning models that can be used, for example, for calculating kind of regression type of problems. But the generative AI, in a very kind of simplifying type of mental model, are really good at, among other things, are really good at 3 things. One is taking large amounts of unstructured information and summarizing it. Another one is they seem to be actually pretty good at filling the blanks. And you've seen, for example, like recently released generative fill for images, where you kind of, I took a picture in my apartment that was kind of missing a piece because it was not shot properly, and somehow one of these AIs actually kind of imagined what was there, and it was exactly what was in my apartment, which was kind of almost scary. But that's one of the many examples. So filling the blanks, for example, in data that might have gaps, extremely good at that. Imagining, all the data that we have to deal on a daily basis. And then think about, so the third one is connecting the dots. So summarizing unstructured information, filling the blanks, and connecting the dots. And connecting the dots is the ability to reason and actually pattern match and connect things that are typically disconnected, that you don't think that they might have a correlation between them. Which is, by the way, could be extraordinary for alpha generation, because really alpha generation is really about finding those things that are correlated but not obviously correlated, right? And so it turns out, at least from what we see and what we read, etc., that this ability to connect the dots and have some form of reasoning tends to be more developed in the larger models. But then the ability to kind of give you answers that are kind of specialized on a specific task are something that you can really, with less cost and like extract from a smaller open source model. And so one of the things that we kind of starting to reach a consensus on is the fact that a good, if I project it in the future, it's really like this triad where you're going to have humans, you're going to have these larger models that are more like an assistant in reasoning, and you're going to have the swarm of specialized smaller models that are really good at a specific thing, like calculating a DCF with data that is not just a mathematical formula, or for example, having a particular opinion on a particular type of commodities or whatever. You can train it on anything, or being really good at detecting fraud, or being very good at doing AML, etc. So there is almost like an arsenal, a constellation of specialists with a reasoning, brain that orchestrates those and actually calls them when needed. And then the human that brings the relationship, brings the wisdom, brings the intuition, brings things that are, really who we are and what we do. I think that triad is kind of an interesting mental model that, I think it's kind of how we think about that.
And how do you think about the product challenge of delivering that to people, and getting the kind of them to be able to use something that's I mean, on some level, you want to be able to mask some of that complexity behind something, right?
I have to say that, in 2023, a lot of, so being where we are today in technology, a lot of the access to this kind of technology is actually has become much more democratic. And so you have, I would say the barrier of entry for fine tuning, for pre-training, for prompt engineering, for reinforcement learning with human feedback, anybody can really do that. I don't think that's the real issue. The real issue, I think, is A, the quality of your data. I think that matters a lot. B, I think, is access to clients or access to people that could actually kind of validate your hypothesis and you get more of. And then also a set of really smart people that are going to kind of create a flywheel and a reinforcement loop that is going to take you from a generically trained AI that doesn't really have any competitive advantage to something that is really uniquely Goldman or uniquely, any other company, where then you need this loop of, human feedback and narrowing down to a point in which, your own internal benchmark of what great looks like and what superhuman looks like are actually approached, in an iterative basis. So, honestly, if you think about it, I think the winners in this race are going to be those, who have at least two of great data or access to compute, because that's actually important, as you know, and it's scarce. And three, access to client or access to a sort of a, large enough set of humans to be able to reinforce, learn, and actually to create this flywheel. And if you have all three, then I think, a company could be at a really great competitive advantage.
So one of Goldman's greatest assets has to be its data. It's part of the history and the scale of the firm. So how do you guys think about your data strategy, and how do you approach making the most of that asset?
Yeah, so that's an area where we've been investing for a long time, and especially in the last 5 years or so, we created a group, actually a fairly large group, that created a data platform, which we internally call Alloy, and has been open sourced, by the way, because we believe actually that given that financial services is an ecosystem, we interact with other banks and other financial institutions, so other people having clean data and reliable data is something that benefits everybody. So we open sourced it under Finos. And really what this platform does is a modern way to look at how you find data, how you store data, how you model data, and how you query data, so that A, we all talk the same language, B, we have single sources of truth, and then we have kind of transactional integrity, lineage. And I think that's almost like a way, because obviously one of the anti-patterns that we all had to fight, that was kind of originated maybe in the 90s or so, which was, hey, I have a data source, I'm just going to publish it on some pub sub, and then someone will subscribe to it, will create local projections or materialization of that data, will extend it, and then will publish it, and then all of a sudden you find yourself with hundreds of replicas that are not synchronized, and then making sense of that data. No matter how good the data is, the discovery of that data and usage of the data is impossible. And so we've been making a lot of progress in kind of creating this unified, centralized, but also distributed architecture to reason and store and et cetera. And we've been consolidating a lot of our systems into that. We're not perfect yet, but we made tremendous progress that, and I think a lot of what we do and what you see is also due to the fact that we have this discipline around data. And of course, I think if I look back a little bit, it's a little bit of a traditional Goldman to be extremely, in a way, focused on the problem of clean, quality data. SecDB, which was invented a couple of decades ago, it was one of the first examples of having all your positions in a single place, being able to put them in a graph database, which at the time was like impossible, and then being able to shock it in real time and see what that does to your positions in response to external events. So this philosophy has always been in the DNA, and now we kind of took it to the 21st century with cloud and distributed systems and open architectures and clean APIs and so on and so forth. I think that, plus the data itself, is really the foundation for any AI effort, not only for us, but I think for any company wanting to take advantage of that.
Right. One of the kind of recurrent themes at Rev is the importance of the data scientists and the technologists and the quants working with the business. Another sort of historical thing with Goldman is the invention of the Strats program and embedding quants deep in the business. How do you think about that challenge in the world we're in now, and how do you go about making sure your organization works, hand in glove with the business?
Yeah, so I think the profession of the engineer has changed in a way that you cannot be an engineer of the how. You need to be an engineer of the what and of the why. The how itself is not going to cut it. We have these tenets, engineering tenets, of which the first one is build with purpose, meaning that you really need to understand what is the customer benefit of what you're building, and also who's the customer. And so one of the things that we introduced in the last few years in Goldman is the idea to use the working backwards methodology, where we ask engineers and business people to work together on memos that, in an Amazonian form of the press release and FAQ, where you're announcing the product internally, of course, before you even write the first line of code, so that you can see how it looks like from the customer viewpoint. And that is kind of something that is so magnetizing for the right conversation with the business people, because if there's a place where everybody converges, is the customer, is the client. I think almost like ironically, with the advent of AI, that has actually taken an incredible acceleration, because at the end of the day, we're all becoming prompt engineers, right? The profession of an engineer as we know it is most likely going to be less and less about writing code and more about writing outcomes and instructions in a declarative way of what we want computers to do. What we want computers to do and how we want them to behave. And we've seen it all by working and many people that have experimented with large language models, they're seeing how sensitive they are to prompting. Mm-hmm. And so I think, jokingly, I was telling my daughter, who's 18, and she just started university, I said, we are probably better off, instead of learning coding, you're better off at actually studying philosophy. Because it's all going to be about mental models. And that's where humans are actually going to thrive and continue to thrive. And it's the same way, we've all been, for those of us who've been in computer science for many decades, the evolution of compilers have been a little bit like that, because I tell you that when I started developing, there was no Python. Mm-hmm. It was, like flipping bits. And there's a big road between that. And today, nobody will think, unless you're a really low-level firmware programmer, but even that, compilers have abstracted that complexity quite a bit. And so this is kind of the next step of compilers, where at the point you're kind of compiling from English, right? And so the ability to conceptualize and the ability for an engineer to understand, why am I doing this and what are the outcomes that I want to derive out of it, is really like what the profession is going to evolve to.
We have time for just one last question. I want to ask about culture. Goldman's famous for its distinctive culture. How do you think about the culture of your team within Goldman, and how you're building something distinctive yet complementary? What are your goals?
Yeah, so I think first of all, driving the right culture is probably the most important job of a CIO, because at the end of the day, it's not really too much of a technology transformation. Technology kind of transforms itself, but it's more about how do you change the culture so you can actually take advantage of that transformation. So, in a bit of a pragmatic way, we decided that one of the very first things was, like I mentioned, let's codify our cultural traits and behaviors that we want from an engineer into 9 engineering tenets. And let's make them complementary to our own sort of overall business tenets or cultural tenets. And so things such as build with purpose, things such as lead with data, obviously, or inspire trust, or the learn and actually always be curious. And I think some of them are obvious more than others, but I think some of them are kind of in opposition. So how do you, for example, keep the bar high and go fast at the same time? or some of them are actually translating into even the way you build software. So if I want people to go from vertically integrated silos to a distributed service-based architecture, the cultural shift is trust. It's not an architectural shift, because you need to trust others to do part of the job that your service requires. You need to trust the service levels that your service is publishing. And in order to create trust, the first element is to create transparency. And that's why we drove setting your service level objectives, putting them in a repository we call SLO repo, publicly, internally publishing your performance against your SLOs, et cetera, which, for us, data creates transparency, transparency creates trust. And trust actually creates distributed systems where we all rely on each other for that work. So that's how you see that you want to drive an outcome. It's a technology tool or platform underneath, but overall and overarching is really a shift of culture. The way you relate with others, the way you kind of relate to your own work, and ultimately the way you serve your clients.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but this was wonderful. It was great hearing your perspectives. Thank you so much for being at Rev.
Thank you so much.